Welcome everyone to this Returning to Dance webinar, Alternatives to Face-to-Face, Outdoor Activity, Blended Learning, and Addressing Digital Poverty. My name is Erin Sanchez. I am the Manager for Health, Wellbeing, and Performance at One Dance UK, and I'm also the Manager of the National Institute of Dance Medicine and Science. The Returning to Dance webinars are presented by One Dance UK and the National Institute of Dance Medicine and Science. One Dance UK is a sector support organisation leading the way to a stronger, more vibrant and diverse dance sector. Our aim is to create a workforce that is well equipped to secure the dance's prominence in the cultural landscape of the future. We do this by providing services, information, and opportunities for dance organizations and dance professionals, including dance artists and choreographers, dance teachers, educators and practitioners, dance managers and producers, dance medicine and science research professionals, and of course, all children and young people. One Dance UK is also a membership organization, and if you're not already a member, please do join. We are stronger together. One Dance UK is a partner in the National Institute of Dance Medicine and Science alongside Birmingham Royal Ballet, the University of Wolverhampton, the University of Birmingham, Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance, and the Royal Ballet. The National Institute works to provide the dance sector with access to high quality, affordable, dance-specific health care and dance science support services in private practice and the NHS. These services are underpinned by dance medicine and science research, including that developed and implemented by NIDM's partners. Best practice, information, and resources are disseminated to the wider dance and health community through educational workshops, conferences, and publications. Our focus for today's webinar is going to be on discussing example alternatives to face-to-face dance activity in relation to relevant UK government guidance, including exploring the technical positives within blended learning, and also addressing outdoor activity and blended learning with technique and conditioning. At the end of the webinar, we'll provide an opportunity to ask questions, but we also encourage you throughout the webinar to place questions in the Q&A box. Just a note on the context of these webinars, although we won't be discussing guidance directly today, public health is a devolved issue, and we want you to keep in mind that guidance for dance activities in England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales will vary. Make sure that you're checking local activity to make sure that there aren't any restrictions in place for your area or region. Note that if there are restrictions in place, these would supersede guidance available in this webinar. Also keep in mind that government guidance will evolve with science. No one has all the answers, including us. Make sure that you read the relevant government guidance for your planned work. And in terms of applying that government guidance, we hope that you'll be able to use some creativity, consider the resources available to you, and discuss ideas with others to address guidance within your context. During these webinars, we aim to provide a space to discuss, raise questions, identify issues, and share practice. We also aim to provide a support for practical implication of government guidance across the dance sector to help everyone to return to dance safely. If you're new to these webinars or to a Zoom webinar in general, you can ask questions via the Q&A box in the center bottom of your screen. We'll try to address as many questions as possible live during this webinar. All of these answered questions will be available in writing on One Dance UK's website following the session. You can also upvote questions you see in the Q&A box, and they will move higher to the top of the list to be answered. We also encourage people to use the chat box as an opportunity to introduce themselves to other attendees. So if you want to, you can add your name and your teaching or dancing context into the Q&A or into the chat box now. We also encourage discussion, debate in the chat box about this and other issues that we address in the webinars. So without any further ado, I would like to pass over to our chair, Professor Emma Redding, who will be telling you a bit more about this session.
Thanks, Erin, and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. It's an absolute pleasure to be chairing this webinar today on behalf of One Dance UK and the National Institute of Dance Medicine and Science. So I'm Head of Dance Science at Trinity Laban, Conservatoire of Music and Dance in London. I'm a dancer, dance teacher, lecturer and researcher, and I've been undertaking research for the last 25 years into the health, well-being, performance of dancers. We are all concerned, aren't we, about how we can best return to dance, and whether we're teachers, practitioners, choreographers, dance artists, managers, and whether we support young people, professionals, vocational or university students, or those participating in dance for recreational purposes. We all have lots of questions. There's a lot we don't know, and there's a lot that we still won't know, because things are evolving continually, and in some ways we're all learning as we go, but we all want to get it right, and or at least we want to do our very best at getting it right. And one way to do that is to be as informed as possible. And that's really what these webinars are about. As Erin said, it's about sharing ideas, thoughts and practices with each other. So it's important to note that this is not a presentation of sort of the right or wrong way of approaching returning to dance, but a space where we can share as peers what we are doing or what we plan to do. And we've got a range of attendees today in this webinar. So we've got people from regional dance agencies, private dance schools, dance companies, universities, vocational schools, etc. And I really urge you to sort of share your own ideas and examples of what you're doing or what you intend to do in the chat box, because it's really about sharing as opposed to sort of just listening to the speakers, although we will do that too, of course. If there's ever a time for the UK dance sector to come together, it really is now. And so I'd like to introduce our two speakers, and they might say a little bit more about themselves just to give you some additional context. But we have Adele Quinn, who is Programme Leader of the BSc and MSci in Dance Science and Senior Lecturer in Dance from the University of Chichester, so welcome Adele. And Dr. Naomi Lefebvre-Sell, who is Programme Leader of the MFA Creative Practice at Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance. Welcome Naomi. And I believe Naomi is going to start with a few slides. So over to you, Naomi.
Thank you, Emma, and good afternoon, everyone. As Emma said, I lead the Master's Programme in Creative Practice at Trinity Laban, but I also teach choreography and performance throughout the undergraduate degree. So these examples I'm giving, I think, can be applied to all levels of training in some way or form. And I thought I would focus on some general technical positives within blended learning. Because of course, when we went into lockdown, the idea of using technology seemed quite foreign because we prefer to be face-to-face with our students. So hopefully these positive examples will put some of us at ease and we can borrow and share. And these are examples taken from last term, where we instantly had to go into teaching in the virtual space in a blended delivery format. So my first example is thinking about how we can use and how we can empower students to work in smaller groups, because of course we love that in a studio setting. And Zoom, as we're all getting familiar with it, has this breakout room option. And we found that students found the space to work closely with a number of peers. It became a space to work in a more focused manner. And the fact that the tutor or the teacher isn't present gives students more independence, autonomy, and a sense of freedom. It also helps students who may be quieter or more reserved, particularly with technology, within a large group setting, to find their voice and the space to try out ideas. So in essence, it's a positive flipped classroom tool where we're giving them more autonomy, the idea of bringing their ideas forth and how they're really important and valued for all of us. Exchanging resources. So there are many platforms you can exchange resources, and at Trinity Laban we used Microsoft Teams. And we found that it was a useful and immediate space for exchanging resources, shared not only by the tutor or the teacher or the supervisors, but most importantly by the students. They were able to share links and materials that perhaps they wouldn't have shared otherwise. Our undergraduate students wouldn't normally have their laptops with them in the studio. And it also became a channel for practical and technical communication, where everyone could quickly become aware and contribute to resolving individual challenges, questions, or other matters, so they could chat and support each other. It enhanced a learner-centered process where students took more initiatives and gradually enabled the group to create a sense of community of learning rather than a top-down hierarchy, so which was really lovely to see. And as a program leader, as a leader of a team of teachers, it was reassuring to see these pages become filled with innovative provocations and the sharings of nuggets of insight and links. Again, something that doesn't always happen in person, particularly if a moment has passed, if you move on in class. And having an oversight of these also put me in a better position to support my team and to link them up together. And then thinking about domestic space as site. So obviously we all quickly had to use our homes as spaces, as sites, and exchanged various references from artists or writers who work with domestic space and domesticity in general. The practical work was therefore mostly site sensitive rather than trying to emulate a neutral studio environment, which we know isn't always possible. And we experimented with the real, so the mundane and the functional and fictional potential of objects, furniture, and rooms that were available. Distractions and interruptions from their home environment, initially perceived as disturbances, were then utilized as sources of inspiration and creative resilience, which was lovely to see. And then we all needed to reduce this amount of screen time and synchronous online learning, so when we're together at the same time, like we are now, led us to remote outdoor tasks when we were allowed to be outside a little bit more. And this proved quite resonant to the students. So writing and reflection, particularly at postgraduate level, but I think at any level, requires a degree of isolation and connection with the self, so a lot of self-reflection. And having time to absorb the surrounding environment during solo walking, imagery partner tasks, so imagining you're with another student outside or in a park or in your yard, proved generative and was perceived by the students and staff as relieving and inspiring. So that was something that was really helpful for us. And those are my examples of some technical positives. And we wouldn't have known these technical positives to arrive until we experienced them. So thank you. And I'm going to just pass on to Adele.
Everything up and running. Can everybody see and hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. All right, thank you for that, Naomi, and thank you, Erin and Emma. So yes, my name is Adele Quinn, and I'm the programme leader here at the University of Chichester and senior lecturer in dance and programme leader for dance science. The dance science programme here at the university sits within the dance department and the Institute of Sport. So some of the considerations that I'll be bringing to the session today are also in the context of a university delivery, a university programme. But again, I feel that there is some potential for these ideas to be attributed more broadly to the various different settings that you may find yourselves in. Maybe if I first start by sharing some of what the University of Chichester has been doing, and then I'll address the particular content of the slide that's been shared with you just now. So in terms of our dance delivery, similar to what you may have heard in previous webinars from other practitioners in the field, we have been moving our sessions online. Certainly at the beginning of lockdown, the sessions were moved online, and that included practical, so creative, choreographic, as well as technical and conditioning classes, technique classes and conditioning classes. but also the theory-based sessions and laboratory-based sessions as part of the dance science programs were also moved online. And that was, as Naomi has already alluded to, a swift learning curve for many of us. And I suppose initially a lot of, if I can speak for myself, a lot of the online delivery was a complete and utter transposing of what I would have done if I had students in front of me to an online platform. But now that we're in the process of getting to grips with these online platforms and other ways of working and dealing with the boundaries that have been put in front of us and finding creative ways of working around them, I think that we are better able to readdress the intentions of each individual session that we have with our students, whether that's a practical session, choreographic technique, conditioning, or whether it's a theory-based session. And it's sort of readdressing the intentions of that session and the best ways in which to deliver it. So as we move forward in September, at the University of Chichester, we are going to put all our practical and theory sessions, we are going to record them all, whether they're done face-to-face or in person, or whether they're done synchronously, meaning online but at the same time as we are now, or whether they're done asynchronously, meaning online but pre-recorded and looked at in the viewer's own time. So all our sessions are going to be recorded, both practical and theory-based sessions. And that I'll speak a little bit more about later in terms of provisioning, because there's a bit of provisioning that needs to be done for that. So all our sessions are going to be recorded or live streamed so that those students who may still need to be self-isolating, or who may be shielding, or who may have somebody in the home that is shielding, that they can still have access to the learning experience. We are also putting some sessions outdoors, and that again I'll speak about in a little while, brings other considerations, moving your classes outdoors. The main class content that we intend to move outdoors is our fitness and conditioning classes. Other technique classes will continue in smaller groups, adhering to the current guidelines for indoor activities, and will take place in the studios. So we're going to have this combination of flipped classroom that Naomi has already referred to, and this idea of blended learning, where there'll be a combination of in-person, adapted for COVID needs, and online delivery. And so thinking specifically maybe about the online delivery, Erin, if you can flip to the next slide. Some of the particular considerations maybe that we need to think about if we're moving our sessions online in synchronous, so as we are now, or asynchronous, a pre-recorded fashion, is whether our participants or students will have access to devices, computers, laptops, notebooks, telephones. What are their mechanism by which they'll be able to access that information? And secondly, whether the content itself is accessible. So from September 2020, the government have set about new regulations which were in place, scheduled to arrive in place before COVID happened. And these guidelines for digital accessibility have come from the government digital service, and they have set a benchmark for online materials to be accessible to a wide range of individuals in terms of learning needs, abilities, and disabilities. So institutionally, here at the university, we have been very fortunate to have a dedicated IT team that have been building us up towards being able to ensure that any content that we would ordinarily put online is now going to be digitally accessible. And so this includes things like not posting up PDFs, portable document formats, because a screen reader can't read them. So information should be posted in a PowerPoint or Microsoft Word and structured in a way that makes a digital online reader much more easily able to read that information out for the learner or for the user. Another example is that videos that we might place online of our teaching should be captioned, so that those who may not be in a position to be able to have the sound on, or those who are not in the position to be able to listen or hear the sound of the teacher, need to be able to see the instructions in a written format. So it's those additional considerations for online learning and teaching that we are having to take into account as we move forward to increased online sharing of information. Another consideration is which platform might we use. There are multiple platforms out there. Zoom seems to be particularly popular with the dance and performing arts and creative arts sector. And it definitely, I've used Zoom quite a lot for various different modes of delivery, and I find it a very useful tool. Interestingly, at the University of Chichester, Zoom is not a supported platform. So we have also had to engage with alternative platforms. I know that some of our professional staff members who also have their own company and who are delivering classes online still via their company are using Facebook Live, are using Instagram, for example, to deliver their sessions. So you don't have to necessarily have wonderfully supported technology such as Microsoft Teams that Naomi mentioned, and Microsoft Teams is one that we have in use here at the University of Chichester as well. You can have access to those personal platforms as well. I think something that needs to be considered in terms of choice of platform is also security measures. So if you are delivering to young people, to vulnerable individuals, and you're using a platform that maybe doesn't have the greatest security setup, that may be visible to a public audience or easily accessed by people on the web who are up to no good, then you do need to consider those concerns. And that is one of the reasons why the University of Chichester doesn't currently support Zoom, is just due to potential issues with its security. So choosing the right platform is something that will very much depend, I guess, on your participant group, on your content of delivery, and on what you feel your participants will engage best with. Then I just had a thought about pedagogy and how then, again, coming back to that point of when we first went online, everything just sort of got shoved up on an online platform. Whereas now we're having the time to rethink, okay, what is the essence of that session? What is the best way we can engage learners in this technique class, in this creative session, in this theory-based lecture? And that's been quite enjoyable, actually, to be able to really reflect upon the intentions of a given session and then consider how best to package that in an online way. And so some sessions we've said, no, absolutely, it needs to be in the studio. We will record it for those who maybe cannot attend, which offers advantages even to those who have attended, because then they will be able to view back that session, and maybe they'll be able to see their own movement and be able to offer themselves some individual feedback, some self-reflective feedback. And so I think there are definite advantages to having to rethink the essence of our classes and how we may deliver those in this new format. I think it also offers an advantage for the learner to actually moderate their own pace of learning. If every session in our case is going to be filmed and then available either live in the moment or again online afterwards, then people can engage with those sessions at their own time. There are many people that will be listening to this not live. They'll be listening to it at a time that suits them. And that has advantages as well in terms of individuals being able to pace their own learning and pace their own engagement. I think this also then bears to mind the duration of sessions. So where there used to be an hour and a half technique class or an hour and a half conditioning class, then maybe that's not so essential anymore. If we have smaller groups, if some of it is recorded, maybe those sessions can be briefer in duration, but actually offer almost a better quality than they might have done previously. And just to come back to that point of deciding whether a session is best done synchronously, so live like we are now, or asynchronously pre-recorded. And both have their advantages. Those of you who are engaging with this session right now obviously are interacting with the speakers, communicating via the chat. Those of you who are not need to store up your questions and send them into One Dance UK afterwards. So again, if there are offline sessions that are pre-recorded and then placed online, then having a way for the learner to still engage with you as the deliverer will be important. So forums for discussion, one-to-one feedback sessions following the asynchronous session will be important to consider. And lastly, I suppose mainly considering within the university sector, is if you're offering all additional resources. Previously, we might have given out a big long reading list to our students that involved going to the library and seeking lots of different paper-based material. And now again, we need to rethink about what's accessible to our learners in an online way that doesn't require them to go to one site and get paper-based resources, for example. So those are just some of the things that we're thinking about here at the University of Chichester, some of the considerations as we're moving our content online, and some of the challenges that we need to consider in doing so. And that brings me to the end of my little session, so I'll hand back over to Emma.
Thanks so much, Adele, and thank you, Naomi, for really, really important insights. Thank you for sharing those and some helpful recommendations for us all. I was scribbling down lots of notes, and there's been quite a lot of chat going on in the chat room, and I'll just share that because Adele and Naomi are probably not aware of that. Actually, there was a question about whether you could share those digital accessibility guidelines, and we could certainly put those up on the One Dance UK website, unless we've got time to post them in the chat now. Adele might be able to somehow grab those from the web. There were questions, so lots of discussion around the various platforms, and questions around or concerns around security, and it seems like we've all been using quite different platforms, a lot on Zoom, but you know, others have been mentioned. There's Adobe Connect and Teams and Google Meet, Google Classroom, Skype. A couple of comments about teaching in schools, which have their, you know, a whole different set of guidelines, and some comment about what that teaching live wasn't possible for some of the pupils that they were teaching. So that's quite interesting. And then also some conversations around the use of sort of the take up and the attendance. That's been interesting, and I wonder whether we've all been experiencing a sort of a smaller uptake than we normally would in a kind of in-person studio situation. Has attendance been poorer in some ways? And of course there might be lots of reasons for that. You know, dance students may not necessarily, there might not be a choice that they can't engage. It might be that they just simply don't have the data, the device, the space available to them. You know, a lot of students are living with others in their domestic environments. And then there were questions around, quite interesting, one comment about students having to film themselves and feeling quite anxious about that. And certainly I've had experience teaching technique. A lot of the students wanted their cameras off. They wanted to do the classes but with their cameras off because of some sort of sense that they don't want their teachers to be seeing their domestic environment, their kitchens and living rooms and all the rest. So that's been quite interesting, kind of camera versus no camera, what the take up and the attendance is, and the sort of anxiety that might go with using various online platforms in your own spaces. And Naomi, I was interested that Naomi talked about some of the creative tasks that she's been doing online as well. And Naomi, I don't know if you want to sort of speak a bit more about that, sort of the teaching of choreography in a virtual space, and how that is, and maybe commenting on anything I've just said about sort of the anxieties that might go on as well. I don't know if you've had an experience with that with your students.
I think it's interesting with choreography or creative tasks that you can, as a teacher, you can come up with something and think this will really work. So we had a task where everyone would make a solo on a chair, and we thought, well, that will work, won't it? And then we started speaking with the students, and some of them only had a really huge armchair, and we had some students back in Norway who only had big stacks of logs. So then you think, yeah, of course. So all we want you to do is be on a lower level. So then we changed it, and they were really happy to be flexible with those ideas. And I'm sure all of us who teach dance would do that. And I think they loved it. They loved having these tasks that made them think beyond how they would work in the studio. So I think they focused on less about perhaps their technique or how they viewed themselves. And we paired them up so they could give each other peer feedback, again, like we would if we were together. And we got them to post work in progress and comment. And again, that developed their literary skills a bit further because they had to type out what they were going to say. But again, we said, don't worry about spelling errors, or just put down thoughts. Some of that evolved into poetry. And then some of them, had very basic technical skills in terms of filming, and some of them created really amazing duets that were layered in different formats. So I think the flexibility, which I think we would all have, but also thinking about how they can problem solve so that we didn't have to problem solve for them. So if they didn't have a chair, if they didn't have sound that they could hear outside of their really old laptop, but that was fine. So maybe some of them worked outside and a train always went by, but that was something really unique, and we talked about time. So those, I think, are some examples, and they have brilliant ideas. They're creative students, and just encouraging them to voice them in whatever format. Some of the students, because their audio was patchy, because of Wi-Fi, and it happens to all of us, they wrote down notes and then almost showed it to me on the screen or uploaded it somehow. And that was really interesting to talk about documentation, and that some of the students added subtitles to some of their videos because they really enjoyed the use of text and the developing language of that, as some examples.
Great. I really like the way you've kind of gone with the environment that they're in, as opposed to sort of insisting on any kind of prescribed task. I think that's really helpful. And I can imagine in technique classes, we might do the same. If you can't reach sideways, let's kind of change the way we're moving and kind of, or the planes of motion that we're moving in according to the space that you're in. So thanks for that. There's been a question, Adele, maybe you want to pick up on this one. I know the class sizes depend upon size of the room, but for example, at the University of Chichester, are you doing smaller sizes? I think you mentioned you were, than recommended, so that they have more space to move. And how is this affecting timetabling? That big question there. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes, so we are reducing the size to fit the amount of students that are allowed within the space given the new COVID recommendations. So that will be slightly smaller, fewer dancers in the studio space than we would do if it was not COVID, because we are adhering to the 2 meter space. We're actually next week and the week after, the staff, because we had stopped much of our semester delivery by sort of May. So unlike the conservatoire, which would continued on through July and have had much more time to sort of tease out their practices, we are now having a practice run ourselves as a team in the coming weeks before the students return to see how this new format of delivery might work. So in a studio with students who have markers on the floor, with certain entrances and exits, we're trying to set up a way for the teachers who are using pre-recorded music to not have to go to and from the sound equipment too much, where they can connect with a cable to their own device and use music from here, so they're not touching too many other devices in the space, and trying to sort of set out almost a demarcation for the teacher as well to have their own space. If they're going to be verbalizing, then they might need to have a wider space than the 2 meter squares that we're working towards for the students. So we're doing a range of different trialing mechanisms. I think the most challenging thing that we are going to face at the moment is the plan to record all of our sessions so that those students who may need to shield or may be exhibiting symptoms and then need to self-isolate, that they can still participate with the sessions. So trying to make sure that each of our studios, not so much of a problem in our tutor rooms and our lecture spaces, but in our studios, ensuring that each of them have the facilities to be able to live record so that it can be viewed by students who cannot attend in the moment. And so we need to continue to trial all of these before our students return, so that we can be confident that we have the best setup that we can possibly have in that moment. So to come back to the question, we will have slightly fewer numbers in our studio than we might normally do, because we're adhering to the 2 meters guidelines, and our classes will also be slightly shorter to allow for the different groups to enter and exit the space, and for sort of cleaning in and out between sessions. And because of the slightly smaller numbers and then the augmented ability to review the sessions online again, we feel that the shorter duration of class is actually not going to be that sort of deleterious to the students' experience, because actually they'll be getting slightly more attention than they might normally do and still be able to view their session online afterwards.
Thanks very much, Adele. There's a question that a couple of questions popping up about teaching under 18s, and maybe either Adele or Naomi could respond to this. It's about the fact that, and of course, if we've got children, we know this, that actually their videos are not allowed, or they're not allowed to put their camera on sometimes for certain sessions. So, so many schools are not allowing videos to be on, so teachers are not seeing the young people. Have you any thoughts or advice or comment on safeguarding policies and safety of teaching of physical practice, particularly in relation to younger dancers who may not be as technically proficient or as creatively confident as those on a degree? So it's interesting, because I'm teaching university level conservatoire students. A lot of them don't feel confident about putting their cameras on anyway, and we've allowed them to turn their cameras off and still teach them. But you're absolutely right, that feedback then is quite different if you can't see them moving. So that's really interesting if you've got sort of school age children who you can't see as you're teaching them that movement practice. Naomi or Adele, do either of you want to comment on that or have any advice?
I currently don't teach to anyone under the age of 18, so it's not something that I've specifically had to consider, and I haven't looked into what the guidelines or recommendations are, but we do know obviously that there are specific considerations for working with or engaging with under 18s in an online format. And I guess, as one of I think Emily Harris has commented already, that the school had advised, that there was to be no live online exchange, and that must make delivery really tricky when it comes to a practice-based subject. So I don't think I can add any advice really to that, other than it does need very special thinking and considering how to adapt practice to not being online.
Thank you. I can imagine it's not impossible, because we all do recorded classes that can go online, and we do allow cameras to be off, or at least we have. So I suppose it's not, but very different, I can imagine as well. A nice comment from someone who was, and I love the way you're all sharing your ideas and practices. So that's exactly what this webinar is supposed to be encouraging. But I like the way that one teacher said that they shared their space, the fact that they were teaching in their kitchen with the students, and that really helped them. It helped the students in terms of overcoming some anxieties the students had about sort of sharing their domestic spaces with their teachers. And I've heard that a lot, that actually going into a big studio and recording your class is not necessarily the way forward, when those students then have to somehow fit that class into a small domestic space. So I think that's probably a key tip, that when you're doing recorded classes at home, and sharing your space, having a space that's similar in size maybe and make up to your students, can overcome some of those anxieties. Just as more questions come through, I thought I'd just pick up on something Adele said earlier about you're absolutely right about how we were all advised suddenly to sort of transpose. I like the way you sort of expressed that, transpose our learning online and to a virtual space, and that it was almost like we just mimicked what we were about to do in the studio but online, and over time we've adapted, and we're really looking now at the sort of intentions of the sessions and trying to maybe think about how best to deliver certain aims and objectives through virtual spaces. And so this hybrid model, Adele, do you feel like it's going to increase the overall workload for us all? You know, how is that going to impact us if we're having to think about sort of different intentions, aims and objectives in relation to virtual and in-person teaching?
Yeah, good point. I mean, I think that it certainly is a bit of a cognitive load, at least, because it requires me to step back from, you know, I've been teaching and lecturing for, you know, decades now nearly, and it really does give me the opportunity, in a way, if I look at it in a positive frame of light, the opportunity to step back and really reflect on, okay, well, in this different learning space, what is it, how is it that I'm going to deliver this session? So a prime example is I lecture at the University of Bern on their Masters of Dance Science every 2 years, and this year is the first year that I'm not going there. So I'm having to replan 2 entire days, 7 hours each day, 14 hours in total of delivery, to engage with a group of students. Okay, they're mature adult students who are professional dancers and well educated already, and they're interested in this area of dance science, so they're really engaged in the program. But I still have to think about how I'm going to deliver those 14 hours to a group of students that I do not know, I've never met in person. I don't know their capacity, their level, their skill, their digital accessibility needs. And I've had to think about ways in which I can continue to get across the information that I want to get across, but in a new format. I'm not there in person, I'm not with them for 2 whole days. And it's been an interesting learning curve. And actually what I've ended up doing is doing a mixture of some pre-recorded sort of, you know, information that's just factual information that they need to know in order to be able to move on. I've pre-recorded those sessions and sent a link to them. Other sessions are going to be very discursive. I've set them a task and a challenge based on the pre-recorded information. Other sessions, I'm giving them a task where they need to meet themselves either in breakout groups or if they want to set up a WhatsApp communication in whatever way they choose to communicate themselves. So trying to give them that mixture between guided, clear instructional learning and then this autonomous engage with it as you will, but this is the boundaries for the task that I want you to complete. And then we'll all come back and share practically over Zoom what the outcomes of those tasks have been, and how we're going to what the experience of the task was, what the outcomes of the task was, and how we might take those forward into our practice. But it really does mean that I've had to completely take a step back and not just churn out the same sort of stuff that I might have done if I was going there in person. And I find that has been, yes, time consuming, absolutely, but actually advantageous and really good. And as someone who advocates for, you know, research informed dance science practice in everything that I do, this is just another way for us to take a step back from what it is that we've always done and just question it in this new format, and reconsider how best to share that practice with whoever our participants are.
Thanks for that, Adele. There are some questions on injury, which I'll come on to in a moment, but I'll just mention a comment that was made, which is quite interesting, about motivation, actually, and from the students learning online at home. This comment: I found that several of my students who are timid or self-conscious in the studio became more self-assured and braver in their own spaces during Zoom classes, whereas more ego-centered learners found it much harder to learn to become more task-centered and self-motivated. So that's quite interesting. Those students who are perhaps really yearning the kind of teacher feedback and the good comments found it perhaps a little bit harder to motivate themselves at home, but those who are more self-conscious were able to. So that's quite interesting. Naomi, I didn't know if you wanted to comment on anything around sort of online, how can I say, conduct or expectations, and whether you've had any, I found with mine at least, motivation, sometimes it's harder in an online setting in terms of them getting a bit distracted whilst they're in class. I don't know if you found anything or could give any advice around that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because obviously they're not with you, and they don't even always know that you're looking at them to get their attention if they've drifted off. Obviously, if you can meet them in smaller groups online, even if you have moments where you have larger group classes online, but knowing that they can check in with you in different formats and that you can comment. So commenting to them privately perhaps, or even saying, some of you are looking a bit distracted, a bit tired. Do we all need 5 minutes where we close our screen? I think it's important to keep that fluid. We did shift. There was so much screen fatigue right in the beginning. We shifted some of our lectures, even though they had film within them, to asynchronous. So we sent them it recorded in their, and they could watch it in their own time. We included some blank screens within it, so they could just pause. So encouraging them to pause, because the eager students want to absorb everything at once, and then they send you lots of comments and feedback, but just remembering them to pace their thinking and their learning. I think reminding them that other distractions, only detriment their own learning. So, if they're getting text messages at the same time, we can tell if their head's always down, all these things. And they giggled and laughed, but said, yeah, thank you for pointing that out. So it's important, and they appreciated it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. Let's move on to maybe a question around injury, and sort of in relation to safeguarding as well, about sort of managing injury, and how do we do that when dancers are working at home, particularly if they're not with family around, for example. And Erin, did you want to pick up on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just wanted to share some of the insights that we had. We created an online dance festival for young dancers called U Dance in July for One Dance UK. And those of you that may be familiar already with that event, it's usually an in-person event where young people come together and experience classes and workshops, and also have a performance opportunity. And unfortunately, obviously this year we couldn't bring people together, and so we decided to have an online learning environment, which was free and open to any young person. And one of the key considerations that we needed to make was that for an audience of the group that we were targeting, which was 11 to roughly 25, including those slightly older people who might have disabilities, we had to consider how we would ensure that they would definitely be safe. And we were in a situation where we were not allowing young people to turn their cameras on in practical sessions. We did have some face-to-face sessions that were discursive in nature, but we had to be very, very careful in terms of child protection and safeguarding to ensure that those sessions were both sort of digitally safe, that no one was going to be able to be in those spaces that wasn't allowed, but also in terms of our engagement with those young people. But from a physical practice perspective, we thought really in depth about the kinds of safe practice guidance that we would want these young people to have, and also who would be helping them to carry out that safe practice. And so we provided some quite simple guidance for setting up their spaces. We also kind of addressed what they should do should they sustain an injury. And we provided that information directly to the young person at the start of every webinar. But we also suggested that they let their parent know that information at the start of every webinar, and we provided written information on our website. So we tried to provide a variety of different possibilities for ensuring that the young people were safe. We did also, similar to what Naomi was just describing, we encouraged young people to pause, to take a breath. We made all the content available for a further 2 weeks following the festival, so that if young people wanted to stop for a bit, practice the content, and then come back to it, that they could. And I think those things, particularly the safe practice components, were definitely informed a great deal by the wider information about safe dance practice. So from organizations like Safe and Dance International and the National Institute for Dance Medicine and Science, as well as the International Association for Dance Medicine and Science. There are actually some quite good pieces of information that are available about safe practice in the context of dancing and working at home. So those were the sorts of things that we were considering in terms of safeguarding and injury prevention. Unfortunately, from an injury management perspective, we're not able to do that directly. And so the most efficacious way that we could think about managing that was really with regard to ensuring that young people had advice about what to do in the case of an immediate injury in terms of the kind of best practice guidance. So those were some of the things that we were thinking about.
Great, thanks so much, Erin. And of course, there are some physiotherapists who are doing sort of online treatment as well. I mean, we've been offering that at Trinity Laban to the public, to professional dancers, as well as to our own students. And I know that there have been a couple of online webinars, as Erin mentioned, on and resources on working online and doing that safely, so dancing in a safe and effective way. And I know that Safe and Dance International have a couple of resources and webinars on their website in that regard. Great, maybe we can move on to then sort of talking more about outdoor activity, because that's part of this webinar. And Adele did mention that I think at Chichester they're going to be doing conditioning outdoors. I know at Trinity Laban we've decided to shorten the strength and conditioning classes we're doing, because of course, as the government guidelines have stipulated, when doing kind of higher intensity activity, which can increase transmission rate through aerosol and water droplets, that it's recommended that distancing is adhered to, and also shorter sessions. So Adele, did you want to pick up on that? And so I suppose conditioning outside, and any safe practice considerations we need to consider when moving practice in an outdoor setting.
Sure, yeah. So obviously we're on a big campus, so our outdoor classes will take place on campus, which we have access to. I'm aware that there are some other dance schools, private dance schools in this region, that are taking their classes outside, and they're taking them out into public spaces. And so a reminder maybe to anybody who is thinking of delivering some of their sessions outdoors, to consider the access permissions that you may or may not have to that outdoor space. If it's on the grounds where you normally deliver, then you may already have access to it. If it's a local park, then you may not. And I think as soon as we start getting into public space access, then we need to also consider, especially if we're working with the under 18s, we need to also consider who else has access to that space, and whether that's appropriate or not, given the group that you're delivering to. I think an advantage, obviously, of being outdoors is that it's less risky for transference of COVID and for any other infection that may be going around at the time. So there is a benefit to being outdoors. I think one of the disadvantages is we might forget to maintain the distance. We might forget that actually facing our participants is not always the best thing, and facing away is what's being recommended, again, to minimize the risk of transference of potential infection. So being outdoors, the same considerations need to apply in terms of social distancing, in terms of non-contact. If you're using equipment, the same considerations need to be brought into play in terms of disinfecting that equipment afterwards and not sharing it across individuals. But we have chosen to do our conditioning classes outdoors, to free up space in our studio space, to allow for more technique classes and creative sessions to happen in the studio space. But also to allow for that more intense exercise to happen in a safer environment. one other consideration, of course, is the surface on which you might be conducting your outdoor classes on, and the relevant footwear and clothing and protective gear that the dancers may need to wear or put on in order to do that effectively. So COVID aside, if you are doing any sessions outdoors, any dance sessions outdoors, then you do need to think about the floor surface. If your session is on concrete or tarmac or a very hard surface, then absolutely your dancers should be wearing some sort of cushioning on their feet. You might need to reconsider some of the choreographic elements to your work, ensuring that there's not too many repetitive jumps, so too much impact where there's not that shock absorption coming back from the floor. You might need to consider changing, going in and out of the floor and how that would work if you're on a hard surface. Outdoors on grassy surfaces, again, it may be slippery, there may be dog poo, there may be broken glass from whoever else might have been using that public space previously. So all those standard sort of safety considerations, health and safety considerations still apply with outdoor delivery, ensuring the surface is as clean as possible, and then adapting the movement material and the clothing and footwear that the dancers are wearing in order to accommodate the space that the session will take place in.
Great, thanks, Adele. I think we've got time for just one more question, and this one is about digital poverty. So any advice around digital poverty? Some of my students don't have a laptop or Wi-Fi access. Is there any funding, or how can I ensure they access online classes? And these are school students. Do either of you want to comment on that? Maybe it's not something that you have the answer to necessarily, or does anybody else want to comment on? I know that some of our students have sort of shared devices in a distanced way, and they go to the park to sort of get that sense of community working together with one device. But Adele, do you have anything to add?
Again, I don't have a solution, I'm afraid, but I do know that there are some charities around the country in various pockets that are offering, accepting donations of old devices that individuals don't need, and then trying to reassign them back out to the community. I know that my son's primary school has been doing that as an individual entity. So anyone who has an old device that still works but is just slow and we don't use it anymore, they've been asking us to ensure that it's been completely cleared of any previous personal information, and then donating it to the school so that that can be donated back out to individuals who may not otherwise have access to the technology they need to continue to engage with their learning. So maybe check out your local areas and see if there is anything like that on the go, or maybe set one up yourself.
Thanks very much, Adele. Well, we're coming to the end of the hour. Thank you so much for your questions and comments, everybody. This is exactly what these webinars are for. I love the way you've all been sharing your examples of what you've been doing. And thank you very much to the speakers. Thanks, Adele. Thank you, Naomi, for your insights and recommendations. And I'm now going to hand back to Erin, who's just going to finish off.
So thank you everyone so much for attending the webinar again. We have 3 upcoming webinars in the next 2 weeks. The first one is next Friday, the 14th of August, which is about physical and mental preparation for returning to dance. And it's going to focus specifically on nutrition and fitness. This is the second in this series. The first one was yesterday, and it focused on mental health and injury prevention. On Wednesday, the 19th of August, we're going to have a session on COVID-19 vulnerability and equality and diversity. And we'll be specifically in that session reviewing the government guidance about vulnerability and equality requirements around COVID-19 and returning to activity. Then the following day, from 10 a.m. until noon, we're going to be addressing COVID-19 vulnerability and equality and diversity. And in this part of the discussion, we're going to be bringing in different voices from the dance sector just to share the implications of vulnerability in COVID-19 and returning to dance that they've experienced. There are quite a lot of issues around this, and One Dance UK, as the sector support organization and an advocate to government, in terms of dance and its place in society, is very, very clear that we need to be having a strong voice on this issue. So I would welcome your input and attendance at those upcoming webinars. And I hope that you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for attending again, and we will hope to see you soon.